Good evening and welcome to the Town of Corte Madera Planning Commission for Tuesday, July 14th, 2026. Would you please call the roll?
Commissioner Rogers?
Here.
Commissioner Harlock?
Here.
Commissioner Bushoyer, I think, is online. Yep, she's joining right now. And Vice Chair Kenny
Yes.
and Chair Chase.
Here. So Valerie is going to be present.
She is remote, and we published the address she's located at on the agenda.
She's on
I'm
another.
here.
Yeah.
Sorry, I wasn't joined as panelist before.
All right, that's great. Please join me in a salute to the flag. Pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation under God, indivisible, liberty and justice for all. Thank you. At this time, we open the meeting to comment for that which is not on tonight's agenda. If you have something you'd like to say that we're not going to talk about later, then you can take 3 minutes now to do so. Is there anybody in the room that would like to comment on something tonight? All right, seeing none, I'll ask Claire if she's got any hands up online.
No hands raised online.
Okay. So with that, we will close that open time for this meeting and we'll go directly to our business item tonight. So tonight is a review and discussion of the Commercial Code Modernization Project. This is the discussion of potential amendments to the Corte Madera Municipal Code related to commercial regulations. Commercial code, I say it again. Anyway, Martha, please. Or Amy, are you going to jump in?
Yes, I'm going to kick this off. Good evening, Chair Chase and members of the commission. I'm going to start the presentation, then I'll turn it over to Martha, who's been leading this effort. But I will say all of our planning team have been involved. So Claire's here tonight and Tracy's here as well. And then we also have Martha Miller on the Zoom, who's our consultant who's supporting this effort, who I think you'll remember that she was here for the study session back in March. So your commission did review this information back in March. And you asked us to go back and do some more outreach, which we did. And we actually have some drafts now and have updates on the outreach. So we're going to go over that tonight. Next slide, please. And so just to go over the agenda a little bit more, we are going to start with just reminding you of what we're engaged in and what the purpose is of this effort. And then walk through the 2 workshops that we held. And then we want to go through the draft of the actual components. And Martha's going to do that and then stop as we go through, and you can provide comments in each section. And that's how we did things in the workshop, and it really was effective and worked well. So we'll go as slow or fast as you all would like to. And then we'll talk about next steps. Next slide, please. And one more slide. Thanks, Claire. So this effort was on our work plan for a couple years and was really started because of the pandemic and a lot of things operating outdoors. We formalized a parklet ordinance, and we left an opening for guidelines and ordinances related to, for instance, our gyms operating outdoors. So that alone was on our work plan for a while. But when you look at our commercial code, it was very obvious that a lot of things were out of date. We really needed to do a comprehensive look at our commercial code, really talk to our business community and see what's not working, where are the log jams, what needs to be streamlined. So we're hoping that this project will create a more flexible, streamlined approach and reflect a lot more of our modern businesses. There's some very funny things that are in our current code that we really don't need to name anymore. And then we also want to really review some ancillary things that may not even be in the zoning code. So there are some components that will not be under your purview, but we want to get your input in as well. So we'll get through that as well. So let me just walk through. So we've got a comprehensive effort to update the uses. And then we also are talking about I just want to make sure it's C1, C2, C3, C4, and then our mixed use code sections as well. Next slide, please. So here's the detail of the various sections. So we talked about the outdoor uses. So it's not just for gyms, but other types of produce displays, for instance, parking standards. You're well aware of that situation based on the conversations we had around Marin Joe's and parking variance findings that we asked you all to make. Another component are temporary use regulations. And this came up because we do have a lot of vacant properties, and those vacant properties want to do a lot of things that we haven't been able to allow. So we want to be able to provide some more economic opportunity as these properties retenant or rethink what's next. But also we want to formalize regulations for things that are already occurring, like farmers markets or pumpkin stands and Christmas tree farms and things of that sort. And then mobile vending is another area where not necessarily in our zoning code, but we need to create some standards around that and also formalize the micro business program that has been going on for the last year or so. Next slide, please. So as far as the timeline, as you know, we came to you a while back, so in March. And since then, we've been refining various components and drafting the regulations with Martha Miller's help. And so in June, we had 2 workshops. One was in the morning, one in an evening. And that really informed what you're going to be hearing from us tonight. And so tonight, obviously, we're doing our study session. And then our goal is to bring back a formal request for recommendation on August 11th. And then hopefully your recommendation will move us forward to town council. We tentatively have a date of September 1st with the town council, and that would be a first reading. And then they would do a second reading, hopefully on September 15th. And then the code amendments would go into effect 30 days after. So anytime you're touching zoning code or legislation, it takes a little bit longer because things do require your recommendation and they do require a second reading for the council. And then it takes another 30 days to go into effect. So that's our timeline that we're working with. And next slide, please. So I'll just walk through the community workshops we had, and Martha, feel free to fill in here. But the first workshop we had, we were very grateful to be hosted by Club Wheelhouse. It was a wonderful location, very glamorous. We learned a lot about the cars there as well. And it was well attended. We had approximately 14 people there and a lot of good input. It was a very casual environment. So it was really great to be able to have a back and forth, and people were able to ask questions freely. And we did receive a lot of great input there. And then we also had a second workshop the next morning here at Town Hall. We had donuts and coffee. I was going to make a joke about parking cars inside, but we did not do that here. The Wheelhouse was just fabulous, and I hope we get to use that venue again for workshops. So we had a few less people. I think we had about 8 people at our workshop on Thursday mornings. We did promote them through the usual ways, and then also with the help of the Chamber of Commerce. They promoted it through their opportunities, and then both the village and town center helped promote with their businesses. And then we also used our social media platforms as well. So we tried to get the word out. We did receive a few comments from people who weren't able to attend this. So we'll have a comprehensive list of everything that we've heard, and we'll kind of walk through that as we go through the various components. Next slide, please. So here are some of the things that we've heard that have really created some changes in what you're seeing tonight, and we're hoping to get more feedback as well. So we did hear a lot about the food truck locations and that negatively impacting brick and mortar, potential noise impacts associated with outdoor music, There were some nuanced comments, one about motorcycle parking of a proposal of 10% and within parking areas being a little bit too high. And then a request to reevaluate minimum parking stall dimensions. And then also to potentially limit fundraising events for nonprofits. So all of that is in attachment 2, I believe, to your staff report. And then with that, I will turn it over to Martha.
And I'll just add for the community workshops that Monty Stevens did go door to door to businesses on Paradise Drive to try to get businesses along there to attend one of the workshops. And then also the draft before you this evening, the preliminary discussion draft has not yet been updated based on comments we received. So we'll refine the draft ordinance based on comments at the workshop and also from the commission into the draft ordinance that is later presented to you. Okay, so as Amy mentioned, we're planning to kind of go over topic by topic, and then we'll pause after each topic for commission questions and feedback. So the first topic is land use regulations. So land use regulations include the types of uses that are allowed, the review process, and any limitations that may apply to a particular use. The current code is very specific. It lists over 300 different types of land uses. Many of these uses are outdated. They are overly specific. For example, there'll be 30 different types of retail that are all mentioned separately. And in other cases, so very, very similar uses are regulated separately. Many of the existing land uses also lack a definition, which can lead to confusion as far as what a particular use allows. So what were the use regulations? When they're unclear, it can be vague and confusing and lead to confusion from prospective tenants and developers. So we're trying to improve that. So the project aims to clearly define all regulated uses. So for each regulated use, there'll be a corresponding definition in Chapter 1804, which is the definitions chapter. The land uses would also be grouped by common characteristics. They will be broader categories that are able to accommodate future uses that maybe currently do not exist, and also would eliminate obsolete uses and provide flexibility for adaptation in the future. So the preliminary draft amendments include updates to allow certain uses by right. So these are some of the uses that are currently require a conditional use permit, and staff in consultation with a consultant are recommending that some of these be permitted in certain districts. So this slide shows some of the changes that have been identified. And if you refer to attachment 3 of the staff report, that is the preliminary draft, and pages 4 through 8 include the various land uses, and it's showing in which districts they are permitted, conditionally permitted, or not allowed. And the proposed changes are shown in red line and strikeout, so you can see what recommendations are being made. And the intent of the changes are to allow uses that are consistent with the purpose of the district and reflective of contemporary development trends. And as I mentioned, each of the land uses would be defined, and Appendix A to Attachment 3 includes all of the definitions, which correspond to the various land uses. So next we're going to be going over some of the outdoor accessory uses that are being recommended. And again, these are just the regulations that have currently been identified, and we're looking for feedback from the commission, and these will be refined in the draft ordinance that returns to you. So the town currently lacks clear allowance for outdoor uses, such as things like gyms or produce display, and this leads to confusion of what's allowed and what standards must be followed. So the proposed zoning code amendments would establish allowances for outdoor uses with clear standards that address compatibility and concerns such as noise, location, hours of operation, and access and circulation. So there's several different types of outdoor accessory uses, and each of these various slides are going to go over those different types of uses and draft standards that have been identified. So the first is outdoor dining. Outdoor dining would be permitted as a permitted use as long as the outdoor dining area is more than 50 feet from a residential district. If the outdoor dining area is less than 50 feet, then a conditional use permit would be required. The hours would be limited to the hours of the associated eating and drinking establishment. Parking would be required if the size of the outdoor dining area exceeds 500 square feet. And for instances where it does exceed 500 square feet, we would look at the area above 500 square feet to evaluate parking. So if it was a 1,000 square foot seating area, the required parking would be based on 500 square feet. Outdoor dining and seating could be located within setback areas. However, it could not encroach into pedestrian pathways or into required parking. The next type of outdoor use is outdoor display and sales. And a good example of this is the Nugget Market, which has outdoor produce outside of their store. So the outdoor display area would need to be directly related to the business on the site. Only merchandise that is sold at the business could be displayed outdoors. The display area would be limited to 500 square feet, and it could be increased beyond that with a conditional use permit. The display area would not be allowed to disrupt the function of the site or to encroach into parking, a driveway, pedestrian walkways, or landscape. And all merchandise would be required to either be brought inside or to be enclosed at the end of each day. And no additional parking would be required for outdoor displays. And lastly is outdoor fitness. So as Amy mentioned, during the COVID pandemic, we created regulations for outdoor gyms to operate outdoors. Several gyms took advantage of this, and many said that it was a lifeline during the pandemic. And that also, as a result of this, many of their patrons, kind of their preferences for exercising changed, and a lot of people still prefer to exercise outdoors. So we're trying to create permanent regulations surrounding something that's essentially been occurring for the last 5 or 6 years. So the outdoor fitness activities would need to be related to the business occupying the primary structure. It would be limited to the hours of operation between 7 a.m. and 7 p.m. unless different hours are approved by a conditional use permit. The size limitation would be 1,000 square feet, again, unless a larger area is approved through a conditional use permit. These outdoor fitness areas could not disrupt the flow of the site or their circulation, and could not encroach into parking spaces, driveways, pedestrian walkways, or landscaping, except that up to 5 required non-ADA spaces could be temporarily used for the outdoor classes. And if, for example, a parking lot if a business had more parking than what was required by the code, then that additional parking beyond the requirement could be used for outdoor fitness classes and would not have that same limitation of the time limit per day. Any equipment that is visible from the right-of-way would need to either be removed and put inside or enclosed unless it was authorized to stay outside through approval of a design review. And no additional parking would be required for this outdoor accessory use. And the town did receive a comment letter from SF Fitness that raised concerns with some of the standards as currently proposed. And that comment letter has been provided to the commission, and hard copies are available as well. Okay. So with that, we will pause and take comments and questions from the commission on the land use regulations and the outdoor accessory uses.
Thank you, Martha. So as she said, we want to break this down into these categories in the preliminary discussion draft, and the commission will ask questions of staff at this point. And then after we get through all of it, we'll ask for public comment on this. So in the first chapter, land use regulations, she's just outlined that. So I'll turn to you, Daniel, and see if you have any questions for staff in this section that she's just discussed. Oh, dear. Okay.
And Dan attended both workshops, so he's heard this material a couple times now.
Okay. You
Okay.
can pass if you like.
No, we have a couple hours, I'd be fine. Well, first I want to say, I totally support this effort. I think it's needed, and I think the material provided is very clear and useful. The one thing that I think we ought to think about and consider when we look at these regulations is not just the use by code, but where it occurs. Because, for example, I don't think the C1 district or the C3 district is the same in every part of the town. So there's a C3 district on the very north part of the town that's really not very visible from 101. It's not a gateway. And I think there could be uses there that would not be appropriate in C1 along Tamalpais where you exit 101, which is really a gateway. So I'd like us to think about, for example, you don't think you want a car wash on C1 on Tamalpais across from town center. So that's one general comment. I think so I have a question. The conditional use permit, is that just staff approved?
So it depends. Some are done at staff level and some get elevated to the commission. And the code doesn't specify who the decision maker is. It often is based on level of kind of like potential impact. So things like a liquor store would always get elevated to the commission. So it's evaluated by staff.
So what I didn't see here is any sort of general statement about what are the criteria for issuing a conditional use permit. And I think there could be some general language that maybe builds on what's in the general plan around town character, around compatibility with neighbors, around location, coming back to that point I made about what might be appropriate in one C1 may not be appropriate in another C1 district or C3. So those are just some general comments. I do have some questions on each of these land use areas under public and semi-public uses. I'm a little concerned about the daycare center and highway commercial and mixed use zones from a perspective of air quality and noise. And whether, because most childcare centers have to have some outdoor space as well as indoor space. So where you're adjacent to both a highway or something like Tamalpais Drive with very high traffic volumes, are they appropriate there? Let's see. I think in the highway commercial conditional use for private schools is okay. Oh, never mind. Then we go down under commercial uses. Cinema and commercial entertainment and recreation is not permitted in the commercial service zone, and I'm not sure why not. I think you could certainly have a theater there. So unless there's thinking about preserving commercial service zone for other uses.
Typically, the commercial service zone is the more kind of heavy commercial uses. So I think some of the more kind of uses where you have more people attending the site and we're left out of that zone. And Martha, I don't know if you want to add anything to that, but if you feel those are appropriate, then obviously we'll take that into consideration.
Was an issue of compatibility, or that we're trying to reserve that land area for other kinds of uses?
Correct. Like in the C4 zone, there's more kind of storage type uses and more less kind of local serving commercial type uses.
Okay. And a drive-through facility is not permitted in the commercial service zone. That seems like that area already has, well, I mean, it could have drive-through services, and particularly where it has, high roadway visibility.
The drive-through use was fairly recently added to the code when the Amy's drive-through application was submitted, which I think was around 2016. Peter, I think you were on the commission, so you may be able to share more. But my understanding is that it was the town wanted to limit where drive-throughs were within Corte Madera, and there were very specific standards that were adopted at that time that require kind of specific site characteristics that really limit locations where a drive-through could exist.
Well, we have a situation where there's drive-through in the permitted under conditional use on the highway commercial. And right across the street, we're not allowing it where uses are also visible from the highway. So I just not sure why we're being so restrictive.
I'll chime in. Some of the history had to do with distance from certain types of other uses. So that you didn't want it near schools, you didn't want to have cars stacking up, you didn't want to have certain things. That site where Amy's was allowed for cars to stack, long line, all of that stuff. So it was a less impactful location to have that.
But wouldn't something across the street that goes out of business, tire place or the paint shop or something across from Amy's or near Amy's also be appropriate?
Well, that was part of the thing, is that that lot allowed for parking and a long drive-through. Those other lots don't have that ability. Yeah.
Good. Thank you, Peter.
And it was, very specific at the time.
And then we come to liquor stores, not permitted in highway commercial. Is there a reason for that?
They currently are not permitted in the C3 or the C4 districts. So we weren't recommending any changes to liquor store locations.
Well, what would be wrong with that?
I would go back to Martha's previous comment about more the neighborhood uses versus some of those more uses that have a higher intensity, for instance, like a car dealership. So the liquor stores are generally going to be on the smaller sized parcels in a local shopping district or regional. But when you're looking adjacent to Highway 101 with some of those sites, they're generally more intense, almost on the verge of industrial, but car heavy uses in those areas.
There's a highway commercial where you've got car dealerships and banks and coffee shops. Why couldn't that?
You could. Yeah, that is actually, I mean, that's absolutely up to you if you want to recommend a change there. But that isn't something that we have had pressure on as far as wanting to cite those uses. So the other thing we're looking at, because this table's a lot of fun for planners, I will say, is where have we been getting inquiries and we haven't been able to say, yes, that's allowed? Where has that pressure been? Or where have things been a conditional use where you've needed a use permit where there were no comments and it wasn't an issue and it really should be a permitted use? So this is somewhat reflective of the last few years of what we're hearing and what we're seeing from the business community. But it's absolutely within your purview to recommend changes to this table. That's exactly what we want to hear.
And then on that same category, we're permitting yard and building materials and stores in the highway commercial. So, I mean, we can get Tesla redeveloped into a building yard at our front door by just permitted without even review.
Yeah, that could be something you may want to look at the definitions for, because that could be, for instance, like a wholesale nursery or something that, but could be something that's more storage related as well for building materials. But again, those are the uses that aren't in proximity to residential and are not likely to have the same compatibility impacts where if they were in C1 or C2, that's where you really want that conditional use permit so we can review those uses to make sure that there aren't going to be compatibility issues.
Well, certainly I could see that in the commercial service zone, but again, coming back to my comment about thinking about the overall image and urban design and character of the town, some of these C3 areas are critical to that. And I'm not even sure I'd want to see a garden shop there because sometimes they can be very messy.
So you can make that statement and that recommendation to the staff. Yeah, there's nothing wrong with that. Yeah.
We have automobile vehicle sales, leasing, and automobile vehicle rental in our mixed-use zone where we're trying to encourage housing.
So those two land uses, it's limited the number of vehicles that you can have associated. So I think it's 3 or 4 vehicles. They're limited to a maximum of 4 outdoor display vehicles. So it would be more like a car rental that has limited vehicles on site. But if the commission doesn't think that's appropriate in that MX district, then we'd like to hear that feedback.
Again, I come back to the highway commercial, the C3 zone being in some areas critical to the town, and we have large vehicle and equipment sales, service, and rental. It seems to me that's kind of why we have the commercial service C4 zone. So I wouldn't support that. Same thing with this construction and material yard in the C3 zone. Again, the same comment, the Tesla or one of those uses in that zone there all of a sudden becomes a construction yard. It just seems totally inappropriate to what we're trying to accomplish visually and the character of the town. Well, I would say the same thing for general industrial, light industrial, even under a conditional use permit. Although again, I think that, the C3 zone to the north may be acceptable for those uses. And that's why I'd like to see some way of distinguishing that or, putting it in the language. So when staff reviews these things, then they can fall back on the language about what's appropriate in which C3 zone or that's that for that table. And if you want to move on
I
somewhere
do.
else.
Yes. Thank you. I think that I just want to reiterate from staff to say that the pages of tables in our booklet have the underlined would you reference that again? The black ones are existing and the red underlined are new proposed. Is that correct? Yes.
Correct.
So anywhere that there's an existing use, it was black. So many of these are already allowed. But we're talking about changing some of those, and Dan has referenced some that are both there. All right, I'm going to go over to Valerie, who's on the screen, and see if she's ready to get some questions to staff.
Yes, thank you. Sorry for my voice, got sick here. All right, so I agree with Dan's comments in regards to definition of some of the commercial zone uses just for the gateways to Corte Madera, so that we potentially do not have businesses that reshape the face of Corte Madera, like repair shops or, the construction storage yards, and so forth. And one question that I have, one note that I have, and then the question following that, in the June 24th workshop, the first bullet under miscellaneous comments, there was an attendee that mentioned that the need to define data centers so we can show that we previously didn't allow that. I think there is a typo. I don't know if it meant them. So just kind of take a look at that one. And in attachment 3, I don't see any classification that captures a data center in general. Perhaps we should add a language that specifically states that we're not allowing them or restricting them to certain areas.
So just to clarify, Valerie, we have a permissive code. So if a use isn't listed, it means it's not permitted. But if the commission feels that should be explicitly stated, we can give that some
I
consideration.
think it would be helpful if we state that for sure. And then in regards to the 500 square feet parking and beyond, so it seems like that there is a discrepancy in two documents. In staff report, you're mentioning that there is required for additions of 500 square feet or more. And then in attachment 3, you're stating that for the increased square footage beyond 500 square feet and not for the entire building of site. So it can be read that in the first reading, it can be read that if someone is adding 600 square foot additions, it triggers the parking for all 600 feet. Whereas in a second reading, it seems like it would only cover the 100 square feet of addition. So it would be also good to specify that.
Does that make sense to you, Martha?
The intent is that parking would only be required if it's 500 square feet or more. So we'll double check all the code language to make sure that's.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. And then a similar question on the attachment 3, I believe page 11 or somewhere there. There is a 30% increase in the required number of parking spaces. But what do we do if the increase is 31%? Does it mean that the applicant need to provide the full 31% increment or only for the 1% to above the threshold? It would be also good to clarify the intent from that one.
So it's an all or nothing. It's if you hit that threshold, then you've got to go all the way with it. And there's no sort of gradient for consideration then.
Yeah, so I think we're talking about the applicability to change in use.
Yeah.
Yeah, if the change in use requires additional parking is not required if it creates less than a 30% increase. But if it was more than that, then I believe we would look at the entire parking.
Yeah. Okay. So go ahead, Valerie.
All right. I have multiple more in parking, but I think that will be a separate topic, right?
Yes.
Okay. Then that's it for me.
Thank you. All right. I'll go to you, Andrew, if you have some things for this section.
I wanted to, I didn't dig too much into the uses for the specific zones, but I did want to talk about parking. Is that okay? Or,
Yes.
Yeah. And on the heels of this letter from SF Fitness, and I have a similar feeling about this that I did about Marin Joe's and the parking issue there, and feeling like at some point, I don't think we should be overly prescribing parking requirements, because what these guys are talking about is they basically want to figure out how many of their private parking spaces they use for fitness versus a customer being able to park there. And I think that to some degree that shouldn't be overly prescribed, not just because it would be difficult to enforce, but these businesses are figuring out their own trade-offs. And so if they feel like they don't have enough customer parking and people are not going to be there, that's one thing. Or if they feel like they have adequate parking and can do with less and make way for fitness uses for those parking spaces, I think that should be their choice and not for us to kind of intervene. That's just a general thought about that.
Yeah, I'm just going to chime in and agree with Andrew that flexibility needs to be a hallmark of the parking application. So we have a new member tonight, Mr. Michael Harlock, who is here, and he can certainly opine extensively on anything town related. But here we are talking about land use regulations. So Michael.
Thank you, Peter. My comments will be brief because I am a newbie, but I think my comments go to these situations where outdoor dining and seating areas definitely encroach on parking and pedestrian pathways. And I'm not terribly opposed to it, but I guess these have been tolerated. And do they require a use permit to allow those? And I'm talking about Keto's and Burmatown, obviously.
Yes.
And those have been reviewed.
Correct. So those are regulated separately since they're in the right of way. So a couple of years ago, the town council adopted a parklet ordinance that created standards for parklets in the town right of way. So those are allowed to take up a small number of parking spaces, and it's typically the area directly in front of the business, up to a maximum of, I think it's two parking spaces if they're parallel and 4 if they're perpendicular. So those are reviewed by both planning and the public works department, but those parklets are allowed to encroach within parking spaces. But for the outdoor dining on private property, we're recommending that they not encroach into any parking, any outdoor seating or dining area.
In a case like Burmatown, where there have virtually no parking available except to use the Old Town parking, how has that been allowed or and I love Burmatown, so don't get me wrong. But I just wonder how that has been reconciled.
Is that an existing use that never has had a parking designation? It's a storefront business or a restaurant?
The businesses in Old Corte Madera Square don't have dedicated parking. They typically rely on the parking at Mankey and then also the county-owned lot that's off of Redwood. So those are all kind of existing uses that were built at a time before parking was provided.
Their parking requirements are kind of existing, non-conforming.
Yep. Correct.
You might say.
Yep.
Okay. Finally, I just, when I see all these outdoor uses, which I'm glad to see addressed, and from my experience being a planner way back, I am curious, and I don't want to open a can of worms, how on an ongoing basis, like food trucks, how can they possibly be monitored?
Oh, as far as
And I don't expect you to have hard and fast answers to that, but I'm just curious because we're acknowledging a lot of them. And I think we should, but monitoring them is another story.
Yeah, we actually have a few slides later in the presentation focused on the food trucks and outdoor vendors. So we can address it at that time if you'd like. So we can go over some of the standards that we have in there. And then I can share a little bit about our existing program and how it's enforced.
Okay. All right.
All right. That's it, Michael, for now, for the moment.
I'm just curious why in this body of work, which was excellent, you got into some of the residential parking standards.
Yes, we
I
did.
mean, that's just a bureaucratic decision, I guess.
Yes. So whenever whenever you touch a zoning ordinance, you always tend to have kind of scope creep where you identify other things in the code you want to fix and
Yeah.
change. So we've done that through this process.
Yeah, okay. Just add it to the laundry.
Mhm.
All right.
Yes.
Thank you, Michael. A couple of questions for you. The bulk of the proposed changes came about from comparison to other communities, or how did you arrive at some of these changes? You had the input from the two hearings, you had our previous input. Did you do a comparative study to other areas, or how did you bring those to the table?
As far as land uses, we didn't necessarily look at other jurisdictions. Some of the recommendations are from our consultant, Martha Miller, who's worked extensively with jurisdictions throughout California. The city of Mill Valley did do a similar update to their code, and they made quite a few changes to their parking regulations to allow for change of use and building additions without triggering additional parking. So some of our changes to the parking chapter are similar to what Mill Valley recently did. But as far as the land uses, it was really based on kind of the characteristics of the zoning ordinance and what, staff and our consultant thought was appropriate in the different land uses and looking at what was currently already allowed or, conditionally allowed. And then also through implementing the code and our experience, like for instance, banks are a conditional use in zoning districts, and we process conditional use permits, and there's never any public comments or concerns. And so essentially it's just kind of a paper exercise. And so for certain uses that generate no controversy and have limited impacts, we recommended that some of those be modified from a conditional use to permitted use.
Okay, thank you. I see that in general, you've added more permitted uses than conditional permit uses in general. So that's your lightening of the regulation here, is to create more possibility. The removals typically were in C3, 1, 2, and 3. It looks like, just looking through it, so that you took away some of the conditional use permit requirements for C1, 2, 3, ended up with permitted uses in many cases. So that's the lightning that you're talking about. I think that the parking and concerns of guys at Fitness SF are very real, and they couldn't exist or function under those regulations that are proposed, the way that outdoor gym. I happen to attend that, full disclosure, that gym, and it would change their business model down there to have to comply with those parking regulations. So I don't know where you might ease up on that. I don't know if TJ's has a similar concern about that as well. They don't screen their gym area at all. So there would be a significant change for those two businesses with what you've got in print here now. And maybe we'll hear from somebody about that tonight. So back to Dan's concern about the drive-through. I just want to say that there was extensive discussion about where to fit in a drive-through. And just historically, there was a long track record about where you could shoehorn in a drive-in. And that was Amy's request to try and use that property, or where else could it be? And Adam had a hard time trying to find it, but he did. And we adopted something that allowed it to occur there, but nowhere else that would fit the requirements that are general community standards for drive-throughs and many other things. So there's an interesting track record if you ever want to look it up about that. And let's go on to the, yes, go ahead.
Getting green here. Okay. When I was reading through the drive-up commercial, like hamburger place. I was thinking the coffee possibility, which I know has been proposed. And how would you define, is that a different, I mean, presumably there's these coffee depots that are drive through or drive up. Does that require, do you think, a separate recognition or definition here? Because some of them would, particularly coffee, would fall under that category, I think.
So far, we haven't heard interest in that. I know a lot of jurisdictions do have drive-through coffee marts and depots and trucks. I think we were concerned about potentially allowing that because of just the space that we have. And if it's on public property, we want to be able to maintain as much parking as possible. So I think that may work on a private property, but not necessarily the way that it's crafted at the moment. So we could potentially consider that. I realize the drive-through conversation happened a while ago, pre-pandemic, and there's been some changes in jurisdictions on how they adapt to drive-throughs because they were embraced during the pandemic when there were a lot of jurisdictions prohibiting them before that. And so, we could open up that conversation again, or you could limit it to that use where it's a cart or a depot of some kind. But I think it would be somewhat problematic on public property.
All right, so did we veer into the next section, parking requirements?
Sorry, I have one more question
Okay, no, I'm
as
sorry.
an example. So for the use or the temporary use, kind of like similar to a coffee stand in Larkspur that currently is awaiting for their shop to be built, and they are placed a little truck right on the sidewalk. So what triggered me thinking, what if someone wants to rent a parking spot from a business and face it the sidewalk, which is a public use, and sell coffee there? Under what condition would that be, and how would we classify them?
So the code updates include temporary uses on private property that would allow for mobile vending. And we'll get to some of those a little bit later. And then there's also mobile vending in the right of way and at parks. So it could potentially fall under either of those scenarios.
I see. And would that be protected by the state code? There was a footnote.
Yeah, and then there is also state code that provides allowances for mobile vending.
Okay, got it. Okay, thank you.
Peter, did you want to take public comment on this section?
Yeah, I will. Thank you. So I think that we've got some people in the room that might comment or online, but let's start with the room. So we'll open this up to anybody who wants to comment on this first section. Please step up to the microphone and tell us who you are, and you've got a few minutes.
Great. Hi, everyone. I'm Becca. I am here I have a we have a private school looking in an MX1 district. And it's 50 Madera. So it's right across from the town center. And right with this proposal, it wouldn't be permitted, even with the conditional use permit. And we're hoping that can change to we wouldn't even pursue the building if it doesn't have a conditional use permit opportunity. So,
Okay, well, that's good to hear that you're speaking up about it. Since this is not stay right there, a formal sort of hearing. Staff, can you respond to that at all in any way about what's changing there or address her concern?
Yeah, so we did actually speak with Rebecca earlier and let her know we were in the process of updating the code. So currently the property at 50 Madera is zoned MX and is currently included in these draft regulations, a private a private school would be permitted at C2 and then conditionally permitted in the C3 and C4 district. But currently, either it's not permitted or conditionally permitted in the MX district. So if the commission thought that would be appropriate use at that site, we would be interested in hearing your feedback.
Okay. All right. Anything else you want to say about that?
Just that we're kind of a unique private school, so we kind of function like a more similarly to a tutoring center, and so I just want to throw that out. But we would want a permit saying that we're a private school. So yeah, that's it.
All right. Thank you very much. All right.
Thank you.
All right.
Good evening. My name is Joel Jakovics, and I'm the president of Fitness SF. And prior to Fitness SF, we were Gold's Gym. So we've been operating at that location in Corte Madera since August 1st, 1991. And what's kept us there for so many years, almost 35 years, is flexibility. We've had to pivot many times, numerous times, things that we didn't even think of, things that we didn't plan for. But so if I were to give some advice to the commission and to staff on how to formalize these policies is to provide lots of flexibility for businesses. Back in 2020, where a lot of this outdoor fitness came from, we thought we'd have an outdoor gym for 5 weeks. 5 years later, we're still paying for the rent offense, which we could have probably paid several times over. So, sometimes you think it's going to go one way and it totally changes. And what we found is the same thing what the staff discovered too, is that a lot of our customers prefer to work out outside. I know for myself, I'd much rather bike on the mountain than bike in the gym. And a lot of our members, even though there's space open inside, a lot of them prefer to train outside. And I think we should be able to give them that flexibility. We have a temperate climate, except for maybe January 2nd. But we have good weather most of the time. People enjoy being outside. And so giving that opportunity to members that would just prefer that. And then giving flexibility as far as what I mentioned in my letter is a couple things. One is as far as hours, our operations from 5 a.m. to midnight. We have a relentless business. We're open 7 days a week. But being able to open not just from 7 to 7, but being able to have it open from our entire operation. The other thing would be, I think instead of just giving a number of 1,000 square feet, I think 10% of your square footage would be probably a good ratio to work with. And then also, like I mentioned to you, the parking is probably our biggest concern. We have more of a campus environment because we do own the properties at 2 Pfeiffer and 110 Nell and 150 Nell, and we kind of have a non-exclusive parking. So that parking is shared. But I think as the chair mentioned, I think it's a good recommendation that the business should kind of decide on what's better for it. Is it more parking, or is it less parking? Is it something else? But being able to provide that flexibility gives us an opportunity to strengthen our business and thrive, and also to give the customers what they want. So thank you. I'd also like to commend the town of Corte Madera. I think the communication's been excellent. The staff has done a great job in their outreach, and has been really appreciate the transparency and also working together on coming up with a great solution for the town of Corte Madera. Thank you.
All right. Thank you very much for all that. Yes. Anybody else in the room that would like to say something?
Good evening, Mr. Chairman, members of the Planning Commission. My name is Scott Hochstrasser. I'm a land use planning consultant here representing Jack Jakowski, owner of the marketplace. I have to compliment your staff. They've done a fantastic job on their outreach and their efforts to amend the code to streamline businesses. I have one question that's been raised by my client, and that has to do with the parking. And it has to do with the question about 30% of increase in the number of parking spaces. And I'll give you an example. The new land use section allows my client to have a cinema at the marketplace by permit, by right, if you will. No review by staff or no conditional review. And it's hard to determine what that 30% is. And I don't know how the staff's going to do that. But I think it would be punitive to require if they're 31%, and I don't know how you get to that, but then to require the 30 plus one. So I think it makes more sense if you're over 30% to require the overage if you're going to allow other businesses to have up to 30%. It's just something to think about. I raised this, I attended both of the workshops, and I think it's something that has to be thought about a little bit in terms of how it's administered, first of all, because if a property owner can change the land use without any discussion, just by right, then how do we know if it's 30% more or 35 or 50% more? It's just a question of how that's going to be managed if the use is by right and there's no conversation with the local government. That's my end of my comments, and thank you very much.
Let me ask you a question.
Sure.
So when you look through these uses, are there any uses that you find you'd like to have that have been taken away, or what has been added that you are glad to see?
Well, all the uses that have been changed from conditional use permit to permitted by right are welcome.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Anyone else in the room? Claire, you know my next question.
Hands are raised online.
Okay. Thank you. All right, so that's a good set of comments from the beginning there. Next, Martha, you want to move on to a section?
Yes, so we'll move on to parking. Okay, so parking requirements can obviously affect the ability to utilize property, particularly in built-out areas where there's not the ability to add new parking. So under the current code, additions to existing buildings require parking, both for the existing use and also for any enlargement. And this was discussed at the Marin Joe's Planning Commission meeting, whereas they needed to add 100 square feet to meet accessibility issues. So then since there was an addition, we had to evaluate the parking for the existing restaurant plus that addition. And they were underparked, which required the commission to consider a variance application. So that kind of underscores the reason for some of these recommendations. So in instances where parking spaces cannot be provided due to site constraints, these requirements may discourage business owners from expanding or investing in their properties. So the zoning code amendments, so potential amendments to parking would revise Chapter 1820, which is the off-street parking and loading section. It would make regulations easier to understand and administer and provide flexibility and the ability to more easily re-tenant spaces. So this slide is highlighting some of the potential changes that have been identified by staff and the consultant. So for a change in use, what is being recommended is that additional parking would not be required if a change of use creates less than a 30% increase in the number of parking spaces. And obviously we heard the public comment related to how that's administered when it's above 30%. So if the commission has feedback on that, we would welcome it. It's something we haven't talked extensively about, so we will obviously discuss that further. In additions to existing buildings, we're recommending that additional parking not be required for additions if they are under 500 square feet. And in the case of this, it would have resulted in the Marin Joe's being able to do that 100 square foot addition without needing a parking variance. For additions to multifamily developments, we're recommending that additional parking would only be required if the addition was resulting in a new unit. So for instance, if an existing apartment building was adding on to an amenity space, such as a gym, then that would not trigger the need for additional parking. For single family residential, we are recommending that the parking standard be modified. So currently for single family homes that are 4,000 square feet or less, the parking requirement is 2 parking spaces. 1 parking space must be covered. The second space can be uncovered, but it cannot be located in a setback area. So staff is recommending that this be modified to allow the second uncovered space to be located in a setback, which obviously most driveways are located in setback areas, so that would facilitate an uncovered space being in a driveway in the front setback. For multifamily developments, we're recommending that the existing parking requirements be modified to reflect the parking requirements that were adopted as part of the housing element several years ago. And this would result in a slight decrease to the number of required parking for new multifamily developments located on parcels that were not our housing sites. And lastly, required parking for non-residential uses. We're recommending that a lot of the parking ratios be standardized to a ratio of 1 space for 250 square feet. And that is currently the parking standard for shopping centers. And this would result in a slight decrease to required parking for many of the non-residential uses. And then the required number of parking spaces for each land use is included as attachment 4 to the staff report. The draft code amendments also include parking reductions. One of the parking reductions is related to motorcycle parking, to allow motorcycle parking to substitute up to 10% of the required parking. And as Amy mentioned, this was something that was brought up at the workshop. Several attendees felt that 10% was too high of an allowance. Also for shared parking, would be an allowance to allow for the total number of required parking spaces to be reduced if the community development director finds that peak parking demand will not overlap, such that the combined parking will not exceed the total capacity. And then also that the proposed number of parking spaces is adequate to serve each use. So this could be applied for instances where there are 2 businesses that share a parking lot and their hours of operation do not overlap with one another. And lastly, there are also some parking reductions that can be approved through a conditional use permit if the community development director makes certain findings. And among other things, these findings would include such things as distance to transit, also the characteristics of people residing or working near the site, and if the owner has undertaken a transportation demand management. And that is the overview of the parking modifications. So we'll pause here for commission feedback.
Thank you, which you'll get. Okay, so I'm going to go to Valerie because she's so far away. Valerie.
All right, thank you, Peter. Okay, so I do see, and thank you so much for that from March 24th session, you kind of expanded onto the categories for the parking reductions. But I do see that there is a motorcycle shared parking and additional reductions that you have added. But I still would recommend prioritizing carpool and ride-sharing spaces for Corte Madera, especially for the EV cars as well. So is it possible to, in a draft ordinance, to require EV-capable conduit for the commercial spaces so that they can convert in the future, or we just simply go and require to provide 1 or 2 EV parking spaces for all of the areas that undergoing the reconfiguration of the parking areas, or for the ones that creating the new ones?
It's our understanding the existing building code requires EV readiness in certain instances, and also the installation of EV chargers. So we'll look further into that before the next planning commission.
I believe that the building code requires only for the large commercial spaces, not for a smaller one. So I wonder if we can kind of go beyond that and further require additional ones if there is a, mid-level business, um, so that they can provide at least one or two parking spaces for EV. My other comment is bicycle kind of parking falls under this as well, or are we going to have a separate category for it?
Yeah. So bicycle parking, we're recommending that the code defers to what's required by the building code. So Calgreen has become much more stringent in regards to required parking. So we would just refer to the building code so that when the building code changes, we're just catching up with what's required.
Okay. Well, so my recommendation would be to go beyond the building code as well, and for all commercial spaces to require short-term racks near the primary entrances. And as well, kind of similar to the situation that we had with Joe's, where they did mention that a lot of their staff are biking to work. I wonder if we could also require and secure the long-term parking with e-bike charging as well for the large commercial uses, so that employees can have an option to get to work as well. My other comment and recommendation as well would be, is it possible to require, in order to reduce the heat island effect, is it possible to require like a canopy of trees, a minimum of canopy of trees? Like if there is a large commercial zone that has been built, could we require a certain replanting in that area so that it provides more shade? And as well as recommend businesses to introduce previous concrete in certain areas to help with the water runoff.
Does that fall into a different code?
So there are allowances in our existing Chapter 1820 about, I believe, tree planting in parking lots, and it's based on the number of parking spaces. It triggers this requirement, and that will continue to be in the code. We just haven't shown all of the code amendments at this point. So we'll look and see what's currently required and evaluate if it's appropriate. And then as far as reducing pavement for C3 regulations, any new development would be required to comply with NPDES permit. But for an existing site that wasn't modifying the parking lot, it would be challenging to require that.
Right, yeah, so it's mostly for the ones that's largely being redeveloped or the new ones. That would be nice to have because it would be more aligned with our climate action plan as well. All right, I think I have just miscellaneous ones. I think it's not on the parking topic, so I'll defer to others. Thank you.
All right. Thank you, Valerie.
Can I make one comment about EV parking? We did receive some email correspondence from an applicant who wanted to re-tenant a space and not part of this effort, asked if we're able to allow commercial EV charging on parking lots for commercial uses. And so that's something I want to throw out to you all to see what your thoughts are. I think from the staff perspective, we could see allowing a certain percentage being okay for commercial uses because it does really invite people to come and sit for a certain amount of time and shop and cater to the businesses there. But it may also, for this particular applicant, help them pencil the investment into the property of re-tenanting with retail uses. And I know we've got commercial EV charging at some of the larger sites, the malls, but we've never really been asked that for the small commercial spaces. So we'd love to know your feedback on that issue as well.
Okay. Thank you. All right, Dan, I'm going to go over to you here. Parking commentary or questions, either one.
Yeah, I'm certainly support change of use and not requiring more parking. I'd like to know a couple of things about the 30%. I mean, where that number came from, how that's working in other jurisdictions, and also some sites may already be kind of barely have the right amount of parking already, and they have a change of use. And 30% would push that parking out somewhere into the street. I don't know. So how do you deal with a site where the change of use would normally require more parking, but they can't provide it physically?
Martha, do you have anything about the 30% and if you've seen it be that number used in other codes you've worked on?
Sure. So different places will use different numbers. Before we used to be kind of tighter on that change of use and have a lower threshold for when additional parking is required. As we've seen, the difficulties are in some cases impossible to provide more parking on an already developed site. Jurisdictions have loosened on that. I would say the 30% is not a magic number. The idea is to allow for a change of use, but when the use changes to something that quote unquote significantly or above a certain amount increases parking demand, then it should provide additional parking for that. So if the parking demand's close between the change of use, it's fine. But if there's kind of the significant jump in increased parking demand, that's when you want to kind of either require more parking or, as what would be the case here, you could request a parking reduction. So you could say, hey, by the nature of this site, its proximity, the fact that we can't provide more parking, we can request a parking reduction.
So is it possible to word something that would give staff the ability to look at this on a case-by-case basis?
Right, that's
A fixed percentage?
The case-by-case basis would be the request for a reduction in that parking requirement or to have no parking requirement for that.
But the 30% would be fixed. It would be sort of as of right.
Correct. Yes. Yes.
And you think that's working in other jurisdictions?
Yes. And I would say, though, it's up to your jurisdiction. Some places don't want to be as flexible and they'll have a lower number. Others want to be more flexible and they'll actually require any change or allow any change of use as long as you're not significantly expanding the building, allow it without additional parking. So this is where kind of the number we put in seemed, from our opinion at this point, to strike a balance for that, but it's up to the town to.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah.
I would suggest the motorcycle parking be reduced from 10% to 3%. 3% is the registered ownership of motorcycles in Marin County compared to other vehicles. Under the shared parking, I totally support shared parking. I wonder, though, if we shouldn't require a shared parking study. They're fairly easy to do. It's a very simple standard process, and then staff would have the information about deciding whether what's being proposed, it seems like it would work.
Yeah, no, I agree. That makes sense. And typically someone would provide you square footage of tenant spaces, hours of operation, and we'd evaluate the required parking for the different uses and make sure they weren't overlapping and they had adequate parking. So I think that's a great idea.
Then the other thing would be, is there a way to consider available parking, mostly public parking, as part of the parking supply if a owner can't meet the requirement, say they're going to expand and they don't have enough space? And obviously one situation would be the Old Town Center. Clearly everybody's relying on, in addition to street parking, that parking. And I wonder if you couldn't say that if there's available public parking within, say, 500 feet, which is a 5-minute walk, you could demonstrate perhaps that could meet some of the parking demand, or something like that. And then on the parking location, I'm not comfortable with allowing parking in the setback without any restriction. I mean, that means we're going to have parking in some cases right up to the sidewalk with no screening. So I think there should at least be some requirement for some amount of landscaping in the setback area.
And is this for commercial or residential or
Commercial.
both? Commercial.
That's my comments on parking.
Okay, thank you, Dan. I'll go over to you, Andrew.
Yeah, on the heels of what Dan said about motorcycle parking, it's 10% does seem a little high to me because I don't think that 10% of the drivers going to a particular place are motorcyclists. I would say 5% might be perhaps better than 3%, but I'm also curious what other municipalities have reached with that one and if that's been thought about or consulted with. To your point, Amy, I'm keen on the idea of EV, commercial EV parking in a private property or for private land. Was that the question? Like
Allowing the EV charging.
EV
Yes.
charging, correct? Yeah, I think that's fine. I'm really happy to see that at least for residential that parking can be allowed in a setback. I have a project now where that's really difficult to accomplish, but we know that people will be parking in the front setback anyway, so I'm glad to see that catching up. That's all I have for now.
Thank you, Andrew. Okay, Michael, parking.
The current single-family requirement is 2 spaces, 1 covered.
1 covered and 1 uncovered. And currently the uncovered space cannot be in a setback area.
Yes. Okay. So I support that from experience. I'm very glad to see shared parking recognition that could allow reduction and also transit proximity as another support. I'm surprised, I guess, from when I was dealing with this, that standardized parking ratios of 1 space per 250 for most non-residential uses. We used to, way back, we used to do an occupancy standard for generating parking. And so you're comparing a nursery with a restaurant and saying all of them are generating only a need for 1 space per 250 square feet. It seems unusually broad for most non-residential uses. How do you define which?
So if you look at attachment 4, it's showing what's currently being recommended for parking ratios. So there are still some uses where we're looking at occupancy to evaluate required
Okay.
parking. So for instance, cinema and theaters has a proposed parking standard of 1 space for every 4 fixed seats, and then a 25% occupancy allowance based on building code. So there are several where we still are looking at occupancy. And then for like lodging, we're looking at the number of rooms to evaluate parking.
Okay.
But the 1 per 250 is really more for, your typical retail, other, gyms, that sort of thing. Currently, the parking standards they vary. Some are 1 space per 180, some are 1 space per 200. So for those, we're just trying to create more.
Okay, I'll take a look at those details. Thank you. So mostly I agree with that. Yeah. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Michael. A couple of questions. I want to clarify something about the motorcycle parking here. To make it clear for my benefit, your definition says allow the substitution of motorcycle for cars up to 10%. It's not requiring 10% for motorcycle. Is that
Correct. It would allow someone to provide less vehicular parking spaces for motorcycle parking.
so? If
to a max.
somebody wants to open a biker bar, they can substitute 10 auto cars for motorcycle parking.
Yes,
That's
10%.
basically it. It's not a requirement anyway.
No, but it sounds like the commission feels that percentage is too high. And I heard 3% and 5%. So
So that would mean that if somebody said, the practicality of this is mind-boggling. So if you were required to have 10 parking spaces and it said 10%, that would mean you would have
one
one
motorcycle
parking spot that could be utilized for motorcycle parking.
correct.
Okay,
And 9 for cars.
right. And if you had still 10 and we dropped it to 3%, it would still be basically one parking spot for a motorcycle would be allowed to substitute for the cars.
Correct.
Roughly, yeah.
Correct. And if the commission thought it was appropriate, we could have for parking lots less than 20 spaces, maybe 10% is appropriate. But then as the number of parking spaces increase, maybe it's a tiered standard.
Okay, so in practicality again, say you're over at the wheelhouse and they want to do something different with it. They've got parking that's defined right there. It is what it is. So that was fine. Now, where would these parking requirements play into effect for what they wanted to do over there? You know, that was established parking. It was a parking lot. It had a certain number of spaces. They can't change it. So when you give them a usage permit, or did that require a CUP? No, not a conditional use. No. So vigorous shake of the
Yeah.
head over
It was a permitted use. It was a combination of uses. And then it was a design review for
Okay.
the site
So
modifications.
got that. All right. So then I'm thinking about Zondas. Go over to Zondas, right? So it's a new application of business over there. The parking is limited. They can't go create parking. They don't own any parking. So what process did they go through that required them to do anything over there, if anything?
So they didn't need to add parking. And most of those businesses in the square uses change and there's no requirement to add parking. So it was a permitted use. So they just needed a building permit. And Tracy can correct me if I'm speaking.
Right. Okay. So as my brain runs around town, I'm thinking where this is going to happen. What's actually going to happen? We've got only so much developable property. We've got Tamil Vista and we've got the village property over there. But Dan's comment is, so say the car dealership disappears and then it can be redeveloped into something. So that's when these applications go into effect for that reuse of the property, right? So you're giving it a new
Correct.
functionality.
They do also, we'd evaluate parking if, for instance, a retail space wanted to become a restaurant space. And if they were, as currently written, as long as the use wasn't requiring more than 30% more spaces, it would still be acceptable. They could go into that space. If it was more than 30%, then they would need to apply for a conditional use permit for a parking reduction. And then as part of that, we would look at what measures are they doing to reduce the demand of people driving.
Okay, so the funeral home becomes a gym or becomes a restaurant. Then you apply this stuff and you look at the square footage and then they're limited in parking. So do you deny the permit because of what's required?
Over the years, we have answered a lot of questions from people interested in that particular site, and they do have a very limited parking supply. And certain uses haven't been able to operate in that building because of the parking and because of what was being proposed and the parking demand. So for instance, there was someone wanted to do a swim school, and the classes were going to be quite large and they were going to have overlap between classes. So it's typical for planner to ask for a written description and get information on the use so that we can evaluate parking. And then oftentimes, we have, conversations with at the counter that this use is not appropriate for this site because of these reasons.
Right. Okay. So therein lies the rub of sort of discouraging use based on certain requirements that you're trying to drop down. And so would these changes in parking make businesses easier to get into the funeral home or some of these tight spaces?
Yes.
You're absolutely certain of that, right? Okay. Then I had the motorcycle, I got that down. So calculation 31%. Everybody's asked, how is that monitored? Is this complaint driven or what is the story about deciding whether the parking is working or not for a facility?
So it's typically when a new use is looking to move into a site that we have conversations about parking. But if it's already established use in a building, then we would only, address parking if the use was changing.
Okay, so it's regulated by you guys, but there is some of this stuff that sounds like it would be complaint driven when there is a problem after establishment of the business. So then you have to go out and decide if they need more parking or what happens.
Yeah, it would come up, during building permit or business license when we know that a new business is coming in. So it really wouldn't, once a business is there, it's been approved by the town, parking wouldn't be something that would come up as an issue.
Okay. And to the bicycle parking and EV charging. So what I'm hearing is that you are saying that somebody could ask the town to put an EV charger in a public parking spot. Is that essentially what is happening here?
No, what I mentioned was on a private property and allowing the commercial opportunity for them to basically install the EV charging and sell the
Oh, okay.
opportunity.
But not in public parking to allow a vendor to come in and install battery chargers.
No, we are looking at areas to add EV charging and have added a few, but that's an ongoing project within town
Right.
property.
Not a part of this consideration then, right? So, okay. But it is on the private land. Andrew, you look like you want to ask a question or something here.
Yeah, I do.
Go ahead.
It's following up on this question of motorcycle parking, actually, which I do support in general. But I'm curious about how this actually plays out. In other words, if it was 10% and the required parking is 50 spaces, you could actually have 45 spaces for cars and then 5 spaces that would be just for motorcycles. Is that kind of the reality of how that would work?
Correct. And what probably would happen is we'd have a conversation with a potential person who wanted to lease or buy a building about a use, and we would talk about parking. And if the parking requirement was more than what was on site, then we would have conversations about, can you convert any of the spaces to compact spaces? And now we would say there's an opportunity to possibly convert to use motorcycle parking, which, and reduce the requirement for your cars. And then if that didn't get someone where if that didn't provide enough parking, then we would talk about the allowances for shared parking and then also for parking reductions through this use permit process.
Got it.
So it would give us kind of more tools when there were instances where there was not enough parking to support a potential use.
Yeah, because one angle on that obviously is that motorcycle parking takes up so much less space. So if someone's, in my example, if someone's able to eliminate 5 car parking spaces and provide 5 motorcycle spaces, that's a lot less land that's required. The other thing that occurs to me is that it's not just motorcycles now, but there is a lot of motorized bicycles and motorized what looks like motorcycles light that don't need to be registered. And I'm thinking that those vehicles might use the motorcycle spaces, especially if there's not enough bicycle parking. So I don't even know how to categorize a lot of those new vehicles, 2-wheeled motorized, but there's a lot of them out there. So just a thought.
Thank you, Andrew. Daniel, you look like you
Well,
want to say
just
something.
because we're on motorcycle parking. So what I think I'm understanding is that the demand for motorcycle parking is not 10%. I mean, in Marin County, only 3% of vehicles are motorcycles. So as I'm understanding is it's a way for a commercial property owner to reduce parking demand. Is that correct?
Correct.
Okay. So the other thing is it seems like, and it's not for motorcycles, because most motorcycles pull into a full-size parking space and leave their bikes there. You know, they don't,
There's not motorcycle.
you know, if there's not motorcycle parking. So, okay, so,
If they want to use up to 10%, they can. They don't have to request it at all. It's not a requirement. They could go zero motorcycle parking.
Yeah.
Correct.
it's basically a way of reducing overall parking demand.
But if they want to have designated motorcycle parking spots, that's how they do it, but they can only go up to a certain percentage that is called out. Otherwise, they don't have to put any in.
Right.
We could expand the language to include EV, bicycles, other things in addition to motorcycles.
All right, well, let's see if anybody in the room wants to comment on this section regarding parking. Anything else anybody wants to say about it? I see heads shaking horizontally, not vertically, so, okay. All right, anybody else online?
No hands are raised online.
Okay. Phew. All right, thank you. So let's move on to the next phase here, Martha.
Okay, so the next topic is temporary uses on private property. So the town has provisions for temporary events on public property. However, our code currently lacks provisions for temporary uses on private property. And this has long been identified by staff as a gap in our code. So it's currently unclear if these types of uses can occur, and if so, what limitations, if any, apply to them. So this project allows us the opportunity to create a new chapter within the zoning code to regulate these temporary uses. So the zoning code amendments would establish standards for certain uses that are intended to be limited in duration. And these provisions, again, would apply only to temporary uses on private property. The provisions identify 3 different categories: uses that are permitted without any sort of permit, uses that would be permitted with a staff level temporary use permit, and uses that would require a conditional use permit. So the first category, uses that would be permitted without any sort of permit. In some cases, staff is recommending establishing certain standards related to the frequency of some of these events. So examples within this category include a yard sale. These occur in residential districts, and they must be conducted by the resident of the premise. As we're recommending that these be a maximum of 3 days, and that they occur no more than 6 times per calendar year. For nonprofit fundraising, as currently drafted, no limitation on the number of occasions or duration has been recommended. These activities would not be allowed to disrupt site circulation or encroach into driveways or walkways. And as Amy mentioned, we did receive a public comment at the workshop that we may want to consider limiting the number of nonprofit fundraising to prevent it becoming a problem in the future. The next type is a private celebration held at a private residence, and this is such things as parties, birthday parties, graduation parties. These events are open only to invited guests, and no compensation for attendance is made. And lastly, are temporary uses that are interior to a shopping center, and this applies to the town center and the village. For example, the town center currently has a farmer's market within the interior of their space. So this kind of codifies that being a permitted use without the need for any permits. The next type of temporary uses that have been identified are temporary uses that require a temporary use permit. These include such things as seasonal sales, including a Christmas tree lot. For this, we're recommending that the time period be 6 weeks before the holiday and 1 week after. And there could be a maximum of 3 events per calendar year. So this would allow a property owner to have both a pumpkin patch and then also a tree farm on their property. There are standards related to noise and lighting and signage, and those are all included in attachment 3, pages 14 and 15. But for like noise, no amplified sound would be allowed. Generators would be required to comply with the noise chapter. Special events would include such things as grand opening events or customer appreciation barbecues. The number of events would either be a maximum of 6 events on one site or 2 events per business, whichever is greater. And there were some questions asked about the number of events at the workshop. And so, for instance, if there was a shopping center that had 10 businesses, the total allowed would be 20. So each business could have up to 2 of these events per calendar year. The duration would be a maximum of 3 days, and there would be a minimum of 14 days between each event. And these events would be allowed to displace a limited number of parking for a limited duration. And then lastly is mobile vending. So this is like a food truck at a shopping center. The number recommended is 1 mobile vendor per lot unless more than 1 is authorized through a conditional use permit. Their duration would be up to 6 hours per day and up to 60 days in a calendar year. So this would allow a shopping center to have weekly food vendor within their parking lot. And the mobile vending could displace up to 5 required parking spaces. And lastly are temporary uses that would require conditional use. And this would apply to temporary uses that don't meet the standards for a temporary use permit. So for instance, if a shopping center wanted to have 2 mobile vendors and they wanted to have it 100 days a year, they could apply for that through a conditional use permit. And with a temporary use permit, there's no noticing requirements and the review time is shorter, whereas a conditional use permit, we would send a public notice for something like that. Okay. So that is it for the temporary uses. Are there any questions on that section?
Okay, folks, this is short section. Daniel, do you have anything you want to ask about this or comment about that?
Few questions. How under temporary uses on private property, how are uses such as political voting registration petitions, religious organizations setting up on private property, is that regulated? Is there an issue with that if not regulated?
Thank you, Commissioner Kennedy, for that question. I think this is one that trickles into some First Amendment speech considerations. So there are general ability for the town to regulate time, place, and manner of businesses and commercial speech generally. They can't be content-based. So we couldn't regulate, specifically because of the religious position or the speech. And forgive me, I forget the other example. It was religious. Political campaign. Again, these need to be neutral regulations, time-based, time, place, and manner restrictions that are allowed under the town's general code, but they have to be evenly distributed and can't be based, on the nature of the speech itself.
So we don't think so it hasn't presented a problem in the past with people saying it's, on the sidewalk blocking their way or anything like that.
I'd have to confirm staff on that specific.
Not that we're aware of.
Okay.
I don't believe so.
There was a comment at our first informal review of this by somebody who talked about, can we make provisions for temporary uses in vacant stores? Is that covered under temporary uses requiring conditional use permit, or is it not covered here?
So if someone wanted to operate within a building, like for instance, if a Halloween store wanted to go to one of our existing buildings, that would just be permitted by right as long as the retail was permitted at that location. So the temporary use is really if it's occurring outside that we would consider it a temporary use under these new regulations. But if it was within a building, we would treat that differently.
So there's nothing preventing somebody from going into a vacant building and leasing it for 6 months to have some sort of business going on.
No, yeah, as long as it's consistent with the zoning district and the use that's permitted.
The only other thing is that on the display, it seemed like the 14 days, the shout to remove the display, it seems like an awful long time. Maybe 7 days might be more appropriate. That's it.
Thank you. Hey, Valerie, are you there?
Yes.
Are
I
you
just
awake?
have a recommendation. So for the entire draft, I only saw the waste provision requirements for the mobile vending. That requires obviously vendors like farmers market to keep the area clean and provide trash receptacles throughout. But the special events and the micro businesses programs, they do not have any waste standards. So my recommendation would be to add for every temporary use permit for the micro businesses permit to require same kind of compostable or reusable receptacles, and also so that it aligns with whatever the Marin County's foodware requirements could be, using the compostable dinnerware, for instance, and so forth.
Thank you. That's a great comment. Any food vendor would be required to adhere to our foodware ordinance. And we have discussed internally the waste management for these uses, but we do not have a standard, so we could certainly create that.
Yeah, especially for the special events in parks, in public parks. And my other question is in regards to the gas generators. So if there is an older business that's still using the gas generator, even if it's code compliant, it doesn't create the noise per our chapter for the noise standards. But I was wondering if we can go further than that and actually require for all of the businesses in the park and all of the micro businesses that operate in the public zone to transition into the battery operated electrical generators so that we don't have to just rely on the code, because as our pilot's intent and the purpose is to enhance the park experience. And I feel like if they're using a dated gas generated, even if it's a code compliant one, it still will not provide that enhanced park experience.
Thank you. We are going to talk about mobile vending next within the right of way, but even on private property, we could create a standard. I will say, because we've had a pilot program working with the micro businesses, it has been challenging because the electric generators, it's just not up to par yet. So we've been allowing gas generators very selectively, with really noise being the issue. So I think as technology improves, that may be easier, but ideally the areas that we've identified, if we're going to be allowing things on a permanent basis, that the town would allow for an electrical hookup. So at Mankey, we've made accommodations for an electrical hookup, and we haven't done so at Town Park because nothing's permanently allowed. But I think that's really the direction that we'd like to see them go, is so they're in particular places that they have an actual outlet opportunity. But as far as these regulations on private property, hopefully they still have the same electrical outlet opportunity and they wouldn't have to use generators, but we can craft a standard to make sure they're not using gas generated generators.
Thank you. That's all.
Okay, thank you, Valerie. Over to you, Andrew. All right, Michael.
Very briefly, I'm not familiar with nonprofit fundraising on private properties. Could you give me?
So like Girl Scout sales in front of a grocery store.
I see. Okay, thanks. I couldn't put my finger on that. What that happened. Now, a kiosk that goes up inside the town center of the village, how is that controlled?
So in the interior of the center,
Yes,
so anything that's within the interior of the center would be permitted by right.
I see. Okay. I think that's all that I have on this topic.
Okay, thank you. I'm not going to contribute anything to this subject, so let's get on to mobile vending and the other stuff we need to talk about. Unless there's somebody in the room that wants to comment on that. I don't know that there is. Temporary use on private property. No one here.
I was going to ask Monty if he has anything to add about the food trucks at the village related to generators.
Regarding power and generators, and I used to be at town center, as you well know, for 10 years. So I'll start with town center. There's plenty of power. So generators are never allowed inside the common area for farmers market, for instance. With the village, we are looking to do one food truck every Thursday, and we've already provided power. We brought it out. So generators and shopping centers don't typically mix very well, so they're not allowed at either side. Regarding public expression, it's a tricky thing to navigate. There's some people will follow the rules, and some people, to your point, Michael, will not. They'll bust in there, put a kiosk, and they just will sit and do their thing. They're allowed because of the First Amendment to do so, and it's a very tricky situation, but it's difficult to control, if that helps.
So anybody that wants to have any kind of event or any type of presentation on the private property has to go through management and get approval for that.
There is paperwork that they have to fill out. Dates are provided that they're allowed to do it, but hopefully I'm being clear that some people just will not follow those rules. And sometimes we'll call the police. The police are pretty powerless to do anything about it, but it's not often, but sometimes it does happen.
Right. So it's not by right by any means that anybody can show up and create an event.
No.
No, right.
Yeah.
Okay.
Hopefully that helps.
Okay, Dan, go ahead.
Okay. Private celebrations. Why are we regulating that? And has this been an issue before?
Sometimes get questions about someone having like a food truck at a private event for a birthday. And we really can't, the code's a little unclear. So this kind of creates some more clarity. And the reason we included that compensation can't be, no compensation for attendance is because this has come up at one of our short-term rentals where they were wanting to hold events and charge a fee. So something like that would not fall under this type of private celebration that would be permitted.
Okay, thanks.
All right. Thank you, Dan. All right. Take it away.
All right, the next section is your last substantive section of code relating to mobile vending and parks, in parks and within the right of way. And this is an area where it's not in our zoning code. And so this is something that you will not be required to make a recommendation on, but we really would like your input. And so this is on public property versus what Martha was just speaking about on private property. And we don't have anything in our code that speaks to mobile vending or any roaming vendors other than they need a business license. So we need to create some provisions. We currently have a microbusiness program operating, and it was really designed to only be at Menke, but we've had a lot of pushback from the local businesses there. And so we've over time, which is great because it's a pilot program. So we've been able to kind of work with the standards. So over time, we've reduced the hours, reduced the days. And now since Mickey's under construction, the food truck that's participating has been at Town Park, and that's been incredibly successful. So what we're designing are some permanent regulations to consider allowing a microbusiness on a more regular basis, with some standards similar to what we're requiring now. So what we're proposing are, as far as locations, is a maximum of one truck in the Menke Old Corte Madera Square area, one Town Park, or I'm sorry, 4 in Town Park. And then another option that we have not explored is Cove School San Clemente Park. That park is actually owned by the school, and we have a partnership with them on the park there. But we have talked to the school, and they're open to having a food truck of some kind there. We haven't had anyone express interest, but that could be a potential other location. And so ultimately, we're looking at areas that are not going to be as problematic for brick and mortar restaurants, but it really depends a lot on what the microbusiness is. Currently, we have one participating, which is the Humble Cheeseburger, and they sell burgers, which obviously could be a competition for our restaurants. Another that has expressed interest is a coffee truck. That may not have the same compatibility issues with brick and mortar, especially in Menke, where there's no coffee other than Lighthouse Cafe. So it really is kind of a case by case situation. And so we want to be able to have some regulations with your input, but have guidelines that really decipher who is allowed on what frequency and how do we vet those folks that want to. And I will say that we're not flooded with requests to be part of this program. Most food trucks want to operate where there's lots of activity. The Village, Marin Civic Center, farmers markets, where there's already a planned system. Not many are willing to go into an area where there's not much happening. But the whole goal was to really create some vibrancy in our parks. And it's done that, but it's also been controversial. So we want to open the door a little bit here with some standards. Next slide, please. And so some of the standards that have been contemplated are hours of operation, signage, lighting, noise, and then events. So because Menke and Town Park have a number of events that happen, we have been requiring the food truck to move unless it's part of the event itself. So food trucks and vendors can be part of special events that occur 4th of July, Oktoberfest, those kind of things. This area of code is really related to when there's no event happening, and we have an opportunity to allow them in some other way. We do have some enforcement issues with various ice cream vendors or things that kind of pop up in Town Park on the weekend. And generally they will just leave. So this would be an opportunity for them to be part of this program. But those roving mobile vendors are somewhat regulated differently. And these are the ones that would most likely stay in one location for a longer period of time. And so, yeah, we're open to any feedback you have on these issues here.
Okay. Thank you. It is a lively subject. So I'll start with Valerie back there, see if she's able to opine about mobile vending.
I think this is an amazing program. I think it makes our town a little bit more dynamic, especially we do have a lot of events during the soccer season. All our fields are full. And I feel like having something like that always is helpful to kind of keep the overload for the other businesses a little bit easier as well. So I definitely support that very much. My only comment would be, since it seems like when we move to the permanent program, it grants the 2-year permit with a possible extension, but there is no evaluation built into it. And from the workshop, it seems some of the residents are concerned about the noise and about the impact on brick and mortar businesses and other areas. I would recommend just to build in maybe perhaps a 12-month report to the commission on the vendor performances, like whether there are any businesses impacts, is there any noise complaints and so forth. That's
Okay.
all.
Oh, thank you. And for the quantities of vehicles and so forth that are mentioned in the report, where do you stand with that?
I think it's reasonable. I think our town park can handle 4. And Menlo Park, I think it's reasonable to have 1 because it's such a small area. What I've noticed also, just in general, speaking out loud here, is that during the concerts in Menlo Park, 1 perhaps not even enough, just because, there are not choices there. So I don't know if commission feels like we could extend it to 2 instead of just 1, but I'm okay with the numbers in general.
Okay. All right. Thank you, Valerie. I'm going to comment that the food that's brought to the town park during the concert was from every restaurant around. Anyway, saw the containers. Everybody went and got their food. All right, Dan.
I support.
Okay. I'm going to go to you, Michael.
I would like to see 2 um, vendors at Mankey Park, Old Corte Madera Square. I think they could support one another if there could be a kind of a mutual draw. And I do think we need to create as much activity there now with the new improvements. In fact, as you hear me over the next few months, I'm going to be pushing for the idea of rebuilding the train station there, and that will tie into some of your standards. Not that that's going to happen immediately, but it's part of the master plan that I did a long time ago for that park. Anyways, I'm definitely in favor of this, and don't shut down the ice cream man.
He's rogue, right? Okay. Andrew.
I support this program, and I generally lean toward allowing for more than fewer mobile vendors. I agree with Michael that there can be a compatibility between different food vendors. There can be some symbiosis. And it's interesting. I get that on a case by case basis, to some extent, you're weighing the position of the brick and mortar businesses against what the consumer wants. And usually the consumer wants more options. So that's a tricky balance. So I'm not really sure how to codify that, but I think more is better in general.
Can I go back for a second and just say that it brings up the question, if the second vendor, for example, is coffee, what constitutes a drive-through or drive-by?
Yeah. Okay.
Also, planning doesn't have any control, and I'm sorry, this is off topic, about paving standards for new parking. Is that Public Works in terms of porous paving, and is that off topic?
Yes.
In public areas, it is Public Works.
Okay. All right.
All right. Thank you. I have a question for the mall man here. That would be Monty or Julie here, about food trucks. And you guys, Monty, you said you were going to have a food truck there at the Village coming up. And if you're willing to stand up and say anything about food trucks there at the mall. I've seen other locations where the food trucks have been removed from malls. Are they too, do they take too much business away from the brick and mortar, or what do you think is going on?
It's a great question. Thanks for asking it. In the Villages situation, we have 500,000 square feet of retail and 3-4 food operators. That ratio is very low.
Yeah.
And statistics show that people come and want to dwell, they want to shop, they want to eat, they want to stay. Our dwell time at the Village is a little low in reference to industry standards, opposed to Town Center that has 12 eateries and less square footage than we do. If you take out the office, considerably less. And some would say there's too much food at Town Center, but it's a good mix. People come, this is variety. Whoever mentioned variety, it's all about variety. I think it was Andrew, pardon me. Customers want variety.
Yeah.
So even if the Village had 12 eateries, I think I would still support a food truck program, because here comes the lobster truck, here comes the Mexicans, the Latin food, donuts, whatever it may be. It's really about variety and bringing the customer something that they're looking for that's new and different. So I'm in
Okay.
full support.
Oh, great. All right. Thank you. So with that said, I think that it's got to be very carefully orchestrated not to take away from those guys over there. Zonda, even a coffee truck can start serving bagels and all kinds of things, and then Lighthouse Cafe suffers for people wanting a bagel and coffee. I don't know how you start to differentiate the types of food trucks that are not in competition with the local brick and mortar. How do you govern that? I don't know.
I think that's what we'll have to decipher with some guidelines and figure out how to vet the food trucks. And that's to say, if we get more than one that's interested. I know Humble Burger is really enjoying Town Park and really doesn't want to go back to Menke, whereas the person interested in the coffee truck only wants to be at Menke. So it's very particular to those business owners. And it's been a mix of input from the businesses up in Old Corte Madera Square. There are a very vocal few, a few that are restaurants, but there have been very supportive restaurants as well and very supportive businesses. So the goal of the program is to create a draw and to create more activity. And similar to what Monty was saying, you want people to stay. But the main issue has been the business competition for a select few, but also parking. And I think that's why we didn't suggest more than one at Menke, because parking is so impacted. We are doing a parking study right now that will be going to council later this fall as far as a review of the time restrictions and the parking situation. But I don't think the businesses would tolerate more than one unless there's some significant changes or restrictions on food trucks coming and going and not just remaining. So I think what we're hoping is that we put some regulations in place as a backbone, but with enough flexibility that we can create some guidelines that can kind of change over time and adapt to whatever's happening. But I really don't see a huge interest in this program. So we do want to allow something to really create that activity that we're looking for. And this was a quick, easy way to do that. And it was successful in that regard. But I still feel strongly we need to support those local businesses. And if there's a way to balance that, then we're going to try to find it. So I don't know what those guidelines look like yet. Probably by the time we come back to you in August, we'll have some semblance of a plan on how that will operate.
Right. Okay. So got it. We got Keto's Tacos, so no taco trucks. We got, that's the kind of thing. How do you start to create that framework? I don't know.
Yeah, it has to be equitable. So that's the hard thing.
I wrote and respond here, flexibility and response. So that's to your point, being flexible with the plan and being able to have the power within the regulation to do what's needed to support the businesses and respond to requests from the other businesses around there. You did speak at one time about having sort of a contract agreement with some of these food truck operators that they would be required to show up or not. How does that work?
I don't think that was me.
No.
No.
Okay, so that they can come or go as they please. There's not sort of a commitment for them to show up.
No, but they are charged money. So if they're in the public right of way, we currently charge the same fees we charge for parklets. So it is somewhat expensive. And so that would be a standard here as well, because they are technically occupying public right of way. So in that case, I think people would likely remain for the hours that they've chosen to remain.
Right, but yeah, some people said to us a lot of times, so when does Humble Burger show up? And I don't know, what are their hours? When do they arrive? When do they go? And so that people say, if I drive over there, they're not going to be there. I want to know when there's going to be a truck there. So
Mystery. That's part of the, yeah.
they might have to go to Zonda, or they might have to go to the Lighthouse Cafe.
I think he encourages people to follow him on social media. So.
Yeah. Okay, so that's the important part, not the impact. I appreciate that you are mindful of the parking, because when people show up at Menke Park to visit the burger truck, they were taking parking spots. They were driving around looking for spots. Trash was not a problem. It was always cleaned up. That was a good thing, but it's got to be mindful of that somehow. So, anybody else want to comment on this in the room?
Chair Chase, if I could just piggyback on that conversation. We haven't fleshed this out now because I know this is being presented in a very narrow scope, but just for the commission to keep in mind, there has been a lot of regulation recently under state law that's expanded the ability for mobile food vendors in cities. And there cannot be any sort of regulation that outright bans mobile food vending, but there are some restrictions that can be placed to limit time, in place and manner based off of objective standards like safety and health concerns. Mm-hmm. There's also another built-in exception for parks, which is what's being proposed here, which the town would have greater ability to regulate mobile food vendors within a park area if it has an exclusive contract with a vendor. So that's what this program would allow for. And we could flesh that out, obviously, as this continues to develop. But if the town has a regular contract with a business or business providers within the town park, it then would be permissible to restrict additional mobile food vendors within that park. If no such contract exists, though, the town would be limited in its regulations of mobile food vendors within the park.
That's news. That's great to hear that there is something going on with that. Thank you. Does anybody in the room know why Marin Mart does not have food truck Sundays anymore? No. Just wondering. Right. They've vanished. There must be a reason why. I don't know. Ownership or lack of business. I don't know. Okay. So, Martha, you've got an earful. Amy, you've got an earful here on these things. What else did you want to cover before we try to summarize?
Just next steps that will return with a draft ordinance for the commission's formal consideration and recommendation to town council. And then there'll be hearings at town council before an ordinance becomes effective. And we do want to thank the businesses that have continued to participate and provide comments. And we hope that they will continue to do so as this moves its way through the process.
Yeah.
I do have two things.
Yes.
Under the proposed required number of parking spaces, under eating and drinking establishments, it refers to commercial center. And I'm not sure, I don't think there's a definition of that. So what zones does that apply to?
But the parking standard is for a standalone restaurant. So if it's a restaurant at a shopping center like the Village or Town Center, the ratio of 1 per 250 would apply instead of this different restaurant parking standard. But we'll look and see if we need to add a definition to flush that out.
Okay. So in this case, you're specifically thinking of regional shopping?
Would be any, I think the code currently defines it by square footage. So we'll take a
Okay.
look at that.
And then under the hotel motel, it seems like there's no parking requirement for employees.
We'll take another look at that as
Okay.
well.
I do want to visit the gym requirement here. I think that the impact that this would have needs to be looked at, and that the statements in this limiting the operating hours and the 10% and the parking, those kind of things are important. They are encroaching on parking spaces in both facilities, et cetera. I think that they would be unable to use the exterior gym areas now, the way this is structured. I don't think that should happen.
I would like to clarify for the hours that if someone wanted to operate outside of the hours, that they could do so through a conditional use permit. And that, hours that go beyond, 8 or 9 at night may not always be appropriate given the distance from a gym to a residential district. So I don't know if the commission would want to consider limiting hours if it's within so many feet of a residential district. So for instance, that gym near the Nugget Market, there's residential directly behind the area that they would use for outdoor fitness. So if they were having people use that space at 10 p.m., that could create impacts to those residences.
Right. Does that gym stay open after 10 over there?
I don't know their hours offhand. I would think they'd be at least open to 9 or 10
Yeah,
p.m.
okay.
But when we can look into that.
So I'm thinking about the fact that along came this COVID thing, and then all the gyms went outdoors. So there was an effort made to allow this to occur. This seems like a retraction proposed from those permissions. So, is it, what drove that sort of pullback on this, on the gyms and so forth?
I think for the hours, it was, evaluating potential noise impacts to adjacent residential uses.
And that would be complaint driven, primarily?
So if we allowed a gym to be outside, whenever they were open and people were using that outdoor space and they complained, we'd have limited things we could do because it's permitted.
Yeah, okay.
I will say, I think what was allowed during the pandemic was very specific to those individual properties. And when you're looking at creating regulations across the entire commercial district, you have to consider all those properties. And so that's why you see some nuances in what we've drafted versus what has been allowed. So I think, we're going to speak internally to try to figure out what kind of process would be easy enough for them to get through. So it provides us to be able to assess the parking situation, assess the noise situation, and allow them to continue what they're doing. But having that check or that minor use permit is important for other sites that have proximity to residential. We had some complaints for some other properties that aren't operating now, but that had residential in very close proximity, and those early morning hours are problematic. So that's why you're seeing this kind of balance.
Got it.
But we're going to take another look at that because the intent is to allow these existing gym operations to continue what they're doing. But it also opens the door to a whole bunch of other properties to start doing that at some point in time in the future. So we have to just make sure that it's meeting all of those property situations as well.
All right. So all those great minds at work over there, you can figure out a way to craft this so that these guys can continue to do what they do now and yet give you the tools to regulate that stuff. Okay. I'll open it up to the other commissioners here. I just wanted to get that out. Anything else you guys want to say about anything?
Well, yeah, on the heels of what you just said, Peter, and as far as the SF Fitness, I think we need to differentiate between the hours of operation and any regulations that might apply to the parking. I see those as two completely separate things, and I would advocate for little to no regulations on how they utilize their parking space, whether they want to use it for parking or for fitness operation. So that's it.
I think that, yeah, part of the idea of this restructuring of the code is to provide impetus and economic opportunity, right? And so removing burdensome regulations is part of the goal, but also being mindful of what has to be regulated. So I think incurring requirements for added expenses is the opposite of trying to incur economic development. So, you don't want to require these businesses to have to start conforming to new regulations regarding, I don't know, electric, all that kind of stuff. That's burdensome. They don't have the money to start creating these things. Valerie, are you still there?
I am, yes.
Okay. Anything else you want to add to this conversation?
No.
Okay.
So,
Other than go to bed, right? So, we don't know I know what time zone she's in anyway. Anything else we want to add? Do you guys feel like you have enough on your scratch pad there to? Okay. All right. For all of you in the room, thank you for hanging out and listening to this. It's important that this get done. Thank you. All right. With that, are we ready to close this item? Okay. Thank you. We will close this item, and we have the opportunity to address outstanding issues in the next 10 minutes, or we want to go home, something like that. So I think that this team here at the table was there for the last council meeting and are better qualified to report on it than I am, even though I was reporting on that meeting. So you guys were there making the presentation, you heard the comments, and so where did it land with the senior center there?
The residential care facility for the elderly at 56 Madera Boulevard was approved by the town council by vote of 4-0. It was a pretty lengthy discussion that quite a few questions. So maybe there were 5 or 6 members of the public that provided public comments, many in support of the use and the need for housing. There were some comments about this use, working with the intergenerational center to create opportunities for the population to engage in the community.
Okay, color commentary. There was a lot of commentary about the public access, about the
pond.
birds, the ponds, and all that stuff. So, I think that I hope it's clear that it's private property and the town is not going to engage in public access along that private property. So, there's that, and the pond will be floraled, and it'll be a beautiful place after it's done, and the black,
Cleaner water too.
right, cleaner water, and I'll never get it right, the black crested night heron or whatever. They will come back, right? They will. Now, I'll ask questions later about public access to the marsh. Anyway, remind me about that. So anything that the planning staff wants to tell us about?
Just that yesterday we did kick off an economic strategic plan. So that's exciting. It'll take roughly a year. And so we'll provide updates as that unfolds, and we'll have a website and some outreach occurring shortly to kick that off. And then the other thing, just to note that it looks like we are going to be canceling the July 28th meeting. We haven't canceled the planning commission meeting in a long time. You all have been very busy. So that is most likely what's going to happen. I think we're pretty much sure, right? We're right. Okay. And then also we're going to be emailing you some potential dates to see if we can get something together to celebrate Margaret's service. So probably an after hours thing of some kind. So look
Great.
out for that
Okay.
email. And just wanted to say welcome to Commissioner Harlock as well. And we're excited to have you part of the commission. And we're your resource. So please let us know if there's anything we can do to help with anything related to commission matters.
Sorry, I can't hear anything. Michael, you were
Yeah, your
not speaking
microphone
into
there,
the
Michael.
mic.
I can repeat the question. He asked if our commercial code modernization project is related to the economic strategic plan. Is that your
I
question?
would guess that they're
They-
come together at some point.
Yeah, the goals are aligned, but when we started the commercial code update, we hadn't really envisioned the economic strategic plan starting. So usually you want to start the plan first and then follow with the code, but honestly, we're accomplishing a lot through the code that will be beneficial regardless of what happens. So there may be other code amendments that come out of the economic strategic plan, but they should complement each other nicely. But they are separate and two separate consultants. Although we had heard our consultants for the economic strategic plan have worked with Martha Miller as well. So that's always great to hear.
Thanks.
Okay, end of information, right? Yeah, we're done with that. Okay. Commission, we have to vote on the June 9th meeting minutes. There are 4 of us that can vote on those, or 3 of us that can vote on those. So that's Andrew, Daniel, and myself. Right.
Peter, I do have one comment on
Yes.
page 3, first line. I think the word transit is meant to be the word transient.
TOT, transit occupancy, transient. Is that correct? Transit or transient? Yes. Good catch, Dan. Yeah. So they're transient occupancy tax, TOT tax.
With that correction, I move to accept the minutes.
All right, 3 yeas. Minutes are accepted and approved. With that said, let's adjourn the meeting.